This is the Mobile Tech Podcast, brought to you by worldpodcasts.com. Now here's your host, Tech Girl, Miriam Joie.
Hi, and welcome to the Mobile Tech Podcast. I'm your host, Miriam Joie, and today is Wednesday, December 12th, 2018, and my guest is Carolina Milanesi. Hi, Carolina, how are you?
I'm very well. Good to be back home after the fantastic week that we had last week with Qualcomm in Maui, where you were as well.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Do you want to tell my listeners really quickly what you do and where you work? And we can expand on that at the end a bit as well.
Absolutely. So I'm an industry analyst. I cover anything consumer, and if you like the consumer within the enterprise, people always talk about enterprises as if it's like one big piece, but then at the end is about the users that are in the enterprise, whatever vertical you're in, that I care about. I've been an industry analyst since 2000. I spent part of my career at Gartner.
Yeah.
And now I am at Creat Strategies. Used to be based in the UK, moved to the Valley in 2012.
There you go, folks. So basically, Carolina knows a lot about phones and the industry in particular, which I think is going to be really interesting. We got obviously some phone topics for you, as we always do, but this is a mobile show, so we talk about everything mobile and a bunch of other stuff. We want to talk about some chips today as well, and I kind of want to get your take on some trends. This all-screen display trend is obviously a big deal, but we're seeing more and more interesting and maybe less interesting form factors around that. So I wanted to hear your thoughts on that. And finally, also, it's the end of the year. And even though I'm going to do a show probably soon that's going to be very dedicated to best of the year, I want to kind of touch on, we're starting to see some best of the year, and I want to touch on some of those choices and get your take on that as well.
Sounds great.
Cool. So let's start with the big news. I think the big news of the week, obviously, is the McLaren OnePlus 6T. So McLaren's teamed up, I guess, with OnePlus. So OnePlus teamed up with McLaren. McLaren is the company that makes super high performance sports cars, but they're really best known for being a Formula One juggernaut for many, many years. So there's definitely a car company. They're known for speed. And I think that's kind of an interesting partnership. Don't you?
I do. Cars and phones seems to go together very well and very often, but sometimes is just slapping a name on a phone. What I was impressed, especially looking at your unboxing that was very well done as usual, was to see the level of detail that OnePlus went through in bringing to market this product. Not just from a design and the finesse of the orange color, which is the McLaren color, going everywhere, including the inside of the USB.
Right.
But just, the little things about including a book that talks about the history of McLaren as a car company. When you fire it up and looking at what looks like a tire mark, as a wall, as a background on the screen. It's just, there's a lot there that doesn't speak to a name that a lot of people put together with, yes, technology enhancements and, being cutting edge, but also with conservative price point, right? There's a lot of elegance in this phone that really surprised me.
You're right. There's a lot of finesse. So I want to, before I go into that, I want to just also say a quick apology to everyone, a public apology, because I was a little early with my video upload by about an hour or so because I misread some stuff. No big deal. Nobody's feelings were hurt too badly, but I do want to apologize to everyone for that. It's very, very unlikely for me to do that. So that's probably why you wondered why the video was up early. But the reality is, to me, when I got this phone, my mindset was Lamborghini phone, Porsche
right.
design, Huawei phone, Ferrari phone, like all these other phones that have been done in partnerships with other companies, and particularly Huawei. Their Mate 20 RS. I got a chance to use it for an entire day while in London at the launch. They lent us one for the day and took us to Silverstone to drive around in some Porsches, which is wonderful. I'm a car person. I own an older Porsche, so obviously it was a big deal for me. And that phone, it's hard to put in like it's hard to explain until you touch it and use it for a day how it can justify its price. Like a lot of people were to me like, seriously, 2,000 euros, almost 2,000 euros for basically just the Mate 20 Pro on steroids. And it's just, like the specs are higher, but how can you justify that price? And I'm like, you have to feel it. You have to touch it. The leather, the build quality is a whole notch better than even the Mate 20 Pro. But what I found really interesting, so I went into it with that expectation, but what I found really interesting about the McLaren phone, the OnePlus 6T that they made, was that it's really essentially a OnePlus 6T. Like there is some accents, as you said, colors and fake carbon fiber behind the rear glass and all that stuff. But it is still essentially a not too pretentious OnePlus 6T. And I thought that was refreshing because the packaging was obviously phenomenal, and that's what I wanted to capture with my unboxing. And the history, and there's also an AR app inside the phone once you fire it up. I didn't get as far as setting up the phone, but if you do, there's the first thing you introduce with is a little app you're invited to run that you can use to get some AR content overlaying that book that's in the in the box. Yeah, very cool. So like it's just all this little stuff, right? And then at the time I unboxed it, we hadn't been given the price. So I was still thinking this was like $1,000, $1,500 phone, thinking along the lines of like doubling the price,
Right.
And then we find out it's $699, and I'm like, okay, so this makes actually more sense because this phone it hasn't been built at a higher tolerance than the regular one. It just has obviously better specs, and it has some really customized, beautiful McLaren touches, and the packaging is really incredible. But I was like, at $699, actually, all of what I just said is incredible. Because
I agree. I think that the idea of leveraging the brand and the love and the passion that people have for cars and for brands like McLaren, but staying true to what your products mean, I think is a win-win, right? Because you're not making people that have a regular model feel they're settling. And I think sometimes that's the price you pay for doubling the price and putting way more on something just because you want to raise your brand to more of a premium status.
Yeah, and I think that's really smart because, McLaren in the car industry is really known for being very practical as a brand. Even though it's super high-end, a lot of the cost is really because of the design and engineering choices they make, not because they're trying to be fancy for the sake of being fancy. Cough Pagani, for example. I mean, wonderful car. I mean, don't get me wrong. They're masterpieces of art, but as well as masterpieces of engineering. But I think McLaren is kind of more like, is in some ways very German and very British at the same time in their car design, because they're just really saying like, we made this for the sake of making this, not because we wanted to be flashy, right?
Right.
And I think you feel that in the OnePlus 6T McLaren edition. And I think that the other thing that also is interesting is because I went into it, first of all, you have to know that until I used the Mate 20 RS, my opinion of these car branded phone was like gimmick, right? I was like, seriously, who wants to spend that kind of money? But it really swayed me to use that Mate 20 RS. I was like, if I had that kind of disposable income and didn't get all the phones to play with for free, I would absolutely look at buying a Mate 20 RS because it is such an exclusive experience. And it's not just about the specs that are better. It's about the better craftsmanship, better materials, and special experience. And I think that somehow this OnePlus McLaren partnership is kind of like captured what OnePlus does so well, which is give us a premium phone at a very reasonable price and brought that into the realm of the car branded phone world, right? And 10 gigs of RAM and in a faster charging system that includes a separate brick, separate cable, and separate chip inside the phone to charge faster. It's the whole system. It doesn't seem like much, but it's only $70 or whatever it is more than the highest spec OnePlus 6T that you can normally buy. For that kind of money, even if it didn't have McLaren branding, that would be incredible.
But I also think that even that is smart because if you think about what you were saying about McLaren in general, cars, there's two things that people like, how fast they go and the horsepower, and the two things are linked. And that's what they gave you in the phone, which, if you think about it, it is actually pretty smart and stay true to that idea of
Absolutely.
the car and pairing the two. So really good thought out idea of taking advantage of this collaboration.
Yeah. And honestly, I feel like you're getting so much in the packaging. I mean, it seems silly to say that, but this, like, you get an entire history lesson on Bruce McLaren, his company, where he came from, where he went to, what he does. If you're into cars, look, all I'm going to say is this. If you're into cars and you want to buy a really nice flagship type smartphone today, and you're considering spending, $8,000-$9,000 on Samsung or iPhone, or even a Mate 20 Pro imported, like, maybe look at this, because you're getting a really great phone with incredible specs for $699, and then you're getting like this, they're limited edition too. I don't know how many, they didn't say, but they're not like going to be super mainstream. So if you can get one, because
you'll stand out.
Yeah, you'll stand out in a discreet way, which is what I love.
Yeah.
And at the same time, again, this packaging is kind of like, it's kind of a time capsule in many ways. And it's really well done. And I was really, I went into it kind of thinking, because I was thinking along the lines of these other phones that are much more expensive. And I was like, yeah, it's just a OnePlus 6T with minor changes, but I didn't know the price. And then, but I did feel the packaging was really special. And then the price dropped, and I was like, okay, well done. Like this, and it's interesting because it doesn't, somehow I was worried that if the price was going to be lower than the other phones that are premium car branded, that it would kind of dilute the McLaren-ness of things, right?
Right.
But it doesn't. That's the thing, is once you're done with the whole thing, you've unpackaged it, unboxed it, you've used it for a day or two, you're like, no, this is, I totally understand this pairing. It makes perfect sense.
I agree. And it's always difficult, I think, for companies to understand where the relationship with a brand, being cars or even from the fashion industry, will take them. I always remember, as a more of a negative story that tells you how many years I've been following this market, when LG came out with a Prada phone in
I remember
Europe.
that.
And that didn't work for them at all because the price wasn't right, because it was too low. And people could not put together the idea of having Prada at a low-end price point. That's not, I always joke and say, if you buy a Prada bag, part of the pleasure is the pain that you go through by buying the thing because it's so expensive, right? There is a certain pride that goes with being able to show how much you paid for a Prada bag or accessory, and that wasn't there with the phone, and that did absolutely nothing for them.
Yeah. No, I think they nailed it, and we now have a phone that you can buy in the US with 10. I think it's available in the US instead of US pricing with 10 gigs of RAM. This is the first phone in the US with 10 gigs of RAM. It's the second phone that I'm aware of with 10 gigs of RAM. Third, maybe Mi Mix 3 is one that was announced before that, and then they just announced the Nex. The Vivo Nex dual screen, which we're going to talk about later, but that also has 10 gigs apparently as one of the SKUs. And let's talk about that for a second. 10 gigs on a phone. Like, I have an iMac in front of me that I bought a year ago. That's a pretty high-end one. It's a 5K 27-inch with an SSD, and I've got 8 gigs of RAM in that thing. I think maybe 16, but I really doubt I went that high. I'll let you know in a second. Yeah, 8 gigs of RAM. And the thing is perfect. It's great. I use it for all kinds of things, video editing. I've never run out of steam. It kind of blows my mind that phones are getting now to a point where, okay, 10 gigs is not the norm, but 6 gigs is getting common. 4 gigs is kind of frowned upon. Hello, Pixel 3, Pixel 3 XL. My daily driver is a Pixel 3 XL, and honestly, I think it needs more RAM. I mean, it's not life crippling in any way, but at that price point, I would have expected 6. And then 8 gigs is honestly pretty damn common now on a phone at the high end. So 10 gigs, I mean, wow. Like, I think a lot of it is for caching apps so that you don't have to reload them, and it makes the phone feel even snappier. So it's not really about like running multiple apps. Of course, it helps with that, but I think a lot of it is just caching stuff. What's your take on that?
Yeah, I think it's also kind of future proving for the next wave of apps that are going to be coming. We're still waiting for the big wave of AR apps, right? And so I think
games are getting massive.
Correct.
As somebody who worked in video games, I look at games on phones today and I'm like, they are faster, better, stronger than what I used to develop even less than 10 years ago on consoles. And you need some serious horsepower for that. So wow, it's kind of crazy, isn't it?
It is, but that's what consumers want, right? And there's never going to be enough megapixels, enough screen, and enough power, right?
Yeah, we're going to talk about the enough screen actually in a second. I just think that honestly, for me, I think because I can obviously understand the most important computer in your life is your phone. It's the one in your pocket, and for entire parts of the market in developing countries in particular. And even in India, which sells high-end phones, including the OnePlus 6T, is very popular there. This for a lot of people, that's their only phone. I know some friends in India who are basically using their LTE as their main internet in the home. That's very common there because it's so cheap, and they basically tether their phone to their TV, to their smart TV, to watch Netflix.
Yeah. I do wonder also as well, though, Miriam, if some of it is, we're talking about 5G rolling out and faster speed and better downloads and uploads and everything else. And what you don't want is for your phone to become a bottleneck, right? And a lot of times it's the network that we blame. But now the network, and granted, is going to take time for everywhere to be getting 5G speeds all the time, and but we're getting there, and so you don't want the phone to be that bottleneck that used to be the network. And so I think that some smart players like OnePlus, they're kind of just getting ready for it.
Yeah, there's a big fire hose. It's about to get connected to your phone once 5G gets flipped on. And that fire hose is not going to take no prisoners in terms of the amount of data it wants your phone to absorb. So, and your wallet's not going to like it either. I think it's going to be really expensive. But yeah, so I think this is great. And I want to actually segue a little bit into an article on Android Police that David Ruddock wrote, my good friend David. They picked the OnePlus 6T as the phone of the year. And I thought that was really interesting because for me, it's definitely in the top 3. But I think it's the first time that any publication has picked a OnePlus as phone of the year. It's always been in the top 5 every year, but phone of the year potentially for not just Android Police in this case, but others might drop that. And I think a lot of it comes down to not just the phone is good, but it's this whole being available on T-Mobile, being compatible with Verizon, and a bunch of other things like that, right?
Yeah, and I think that definitely OnePlus is making it clear that the US is a much more important market for them than it's always been. And they are now at a point where I think they have a pretty good idea how to go about and taking advantage of it as well, which is great because we need more competition in the US market. If this
could be a tipping point, actually, for them, for the company, I think it's a tipping point. But for next year, I think we might see OnePlus become the third choice for if they get to the other carriers for the OnePlus 7. I think we might see them really potentially getting the third podium.
Yeah, I wrote a piece when we came back from London, actually, after the Huawei event, about how, going back to London after a few years, I normally kind of fly via London to go to Mobile World Congress, but I never stop. And so it's been about 3 years since I've been there. And what really shocked me as a reminder was how diverse the market in Europe is.
It's so nice, isn't it?
It is. It's not just everybody owning, a Samsung or an iPhone. You see so much more variety with more Chinese brands like Huawei, but also local players like Alcatel and Wiko. And so it's kind of nice. And I came back thinking, well, will the US miss out on some of this new innovation, and we're going to talk about a little bit about the phones, the screens, and the dual screens, and the camera, and all of that. A lot of that is coming from China, and the US is not going to see many of those products. So it's quite fascinating.
Yeah, no, I mean, my listeners are kind of early adopter, tech savvy folks, and they are the ones who are most likely to import a phone and use it for a few months and then upgrade to something else. It's an expensive hobby, but I can understand why. Like, honestly, if you can afford it and you're not working in media or an analyst, it's interesting. And because there's so much innovation, and some of it, I know a lot of people are going to roll their eyes saying, Miriam, this is so gimmicky, these phones with these weird form factors. And I'm like, but it's part of maturation of product and market. It's part of growth. It's part of innovation. It's how it goes. Sometimes you make weird things to get to your final destination, whatever that might be. And that's actually really healthy. And the fact that we don't have that choice and variety in the US in a more kind of commonplace way, like you can still go on Amazon and buy gray market devices, of course, but nobody really does that, right? Which goes back to the OnePlus 6T, the fact that you can now buy one and walk into a T-Mobile store and walk out with a OnePlus 6T that's completely sanctioned by that network, and then even buy a OnePlus 6T like that McLaren edition and bring it to Verizon, put a Verizon SIM in it, and Verizon has blessed it. That is huge.
Yeah,
that is like a massive thing. And I think that if they play their cards right and continue being a value leader in the flagship segment and continue building these relationships with the carriers, they might do what Huawei was posed to do last year, right?
Yeah. I think it's a very different company, though.
Of course.
From
absolutely.
a cultural perspective as well. In terms of, I still find that OnePlus is a humble company.
Absolutely.
They do their work, they get it done, they don't overpromise, and they deliver. And that's, if you compare to, for instance, an Essential, there's a very different attitude to market, right?
Yeah, but I think Essential is sorry for the pun, but is quintessentially Silicon Valley, right?
It's
so Silicon Valley.
Very much so.
And there's some charm to that. I mean, if you look at it, Nextbit, which got acquired by Razer and is evolved into the Razer phone we know today, the Nextbit Robin is also very Silicon Valley. But it succeeded. I mean, it shipped relatively on time. It shipped relatively with the features that we expected. We all loved that phone, and the company succeeded. They got acquired. Everybody was happy, except for maybe the users on Nextbit who now are buying Razer phones, question mark. I'm not sure they are buying Razer phones. But look, the point is that is also a success story that's very Silicon Valley. So it could go either way, right? I just want to remind all of us of that. And, But you're right. I think OnePlus, because of their Chinese roots, because they have BBK and backing them in many ways, and access to shared technology with Oppo and Vivo, means that they have resources that are extraordinary compared to the Silicon Valley startups. But of course, these resources pale to what Apple, Samsung, and Huawei have.
Yes.
But at the same time, I think that they're well posed to become a very solid third contender next year, at least in the US market. And I hope that opens the doors to maybe a company like Honor, which we all know is Huawei, but they are somehow very stubborn about distinguishing the two brands for whatever reason. Because I think Honor doesn't have the stigma of Huawei in the US, even though we all know it's the same thing. They could potentially develop that brand into something, but they're not thinking about it the wrong way. I've been telling them for a while now that they need to make a pure Android device that's even cheaper than OnePlus. Like that area where they are $200-$300 with the things like the Honor 7 last year and the Honor 8, 7X last year and 8X this year these are great phones at their price point with great features, and they are sold in the US, yet they are so Chinese, they're so heavily skinned. Like what they really need is kind of more lightweight, pure experience that OnePlus is offering at that price point. And they could potentially, compete with the Moto G6, which is, I think, today the champion of $250 phones, you know?
Yeah, I'm surprised that they don't look. First of all, I think that Huawei is still very confused about what they want to do with Honor.
That's true.
They keep on going back and forth as to what Honor stands for and how they want to play, uh, how close or how far away from the Huawei brand they want Honor to be, depending on how the politics are working out for them. But I think the point you're making about competing with Motorola is a good one, because they have a low-hanging fruit that they're not taking advantage of, which is the new initiative with the Android One that is a bit more kind of higher spec than the original idea of One was, which was more targeted emerging markets. Here they're really targeting now mature markets like the US for those users who don't want to get a flagship for $1,000.
Totally. And Android Go is now what Android One was promised to be, right?
Correct.
And it's completely failing. But okay.
Yes.
That's another story.
Yes. But so they would have that opportunity if they decided, okay, so this is Honor, this is about volume, it's about making a go at a presence in the US. It's not about ecosystem, it's not about our UI, it's not about our AI. Let's just get in the market. And I think that would be the way to do it.
I agree. I mean, I've been telling the folks at Honor and Huawei for a while now. And every time I bring up Honor to Huawei people, they look at me like, we don't do that. And I'm like,
it's not ours.
no, you are doing that, and you are going to listen to me. Because if you don't relay that to whoever is doing Honor, you're being idiots. And then they shut up and they listen. And I'm like, that's all I'm saying. Just relay that on. Think about it. Because really what they think they should do is Android One. And I know this is heresy, and I know there are some good and positives to what I'm about to say. But I think they should make a Qualcomm-based phone. That would appease, imagine this, Android One, pretty much Google, pure Google. Qualcomm, US IP, if they made a phone in China, but had Qualcomm and Android One and sold in the US, competed with Lenovo, I should say Motorola, which is owned by Lenovo, and maybe compete even with OnePlus. They have the might to do that. The price.
But see, what is fascinating is that they seem to understand that for the PC business. So they understood that coming to the US with a Windows machine
and an Intel processor, absolutely
correct. So why not do the same for the phone? And they just don't connect the two at all.
And I know that a lot of people are going to say, and I'm a bit of a proponent, like I'm going to be a kind of devil's advocate towards my own argument here. But I do have to appreciate that with the Mate 20 series, which I love, which is probably my number one phone of 2018, to be honest, the Mate 20 Pro, very close to the OnePlus 6T, and then it falls down from there. But as an aside, I think that there is something to be said about Huawei's mightiness in integration. This vertical integration that they're achieving with their current processors and their own battery tech, their own cooling tech, their own camera tech, and they're putting it all together in this absolutely phenomenal flagship device. That's Apple grade stuff. That's something that we only see Apple and Samsung capable of. And I think and Samsung is even dropping the ball there because the Exynos can't keep up with Snapdragon, right? So they're going Snapdragon all the way. And so I feel like we have this thing that they have an advantage, Huawei, because they have highly integrated software hardware. But at the same time, for this market, they have this great brand Honor. And I think that they could leverage that brand by not vertically integrating and using Qualcomm and Android One and be really successful because they have supply and they have supply chain and all that really optimized. And they could make a really great product that, kind of goes against their highly vertically integrated principles, but really still works.
But yeah, and I don't disagree with you that their vertical approach is definitely a differentiator and not something that anybody apart from Samsung and Apple can do, right? And so just that puts them in a very good position. But I add to that unfortunately I think I still see a lot of that kind of Chinese mentality where there's a lot of smoke and mirrors, right? Where just talk about the stuff you're doing and that is enough. You don't have to layer a lot of, fluff on top that then somebody's going to go and and try it and it doesn't work. just keep it simple and keep
I
it
agree.
real and
Yeah,
talk
and that's
about what
OnePlus
you
is doing.
deliver.
Yeah, exactly.
Correct. Exactly.
And they've got the right messaging and approach to that. So, and I think Honor has the might that they could come in and somewhat, in some ways, undercut OnePlus, and not necessarily at the same value flagship price point, but maybe even at the lower, like $250, $300 price point. They could easily compete with the Pocophone, and they have the Honor Play already, which is Kirin 970 based, and it's a $300 phone. So, I mean,
it's amazing, isn't it?
It's amazing. And so my, in the Pocophone, I have one finally, and I'll put a link to my unboxing. It's incredible what you're getting for $350.
Yeah.
I feel like I'm using basically a flagship phone, even though it's plastic, like the whole thing is plastic. That's about the only time that I feel like I'm making a compromise. The camera is turning out to be great on that phone, which I did not expect at all at that price point, because the Honor Play doesn't have a really good camera. It's okay, but it's not great. The display is awesome. The battery life is decent, and you have a Snapdragon 845 and 6 gigs of RAM in that phone for $350. Wow. So this is what I think is interesting. Xiaomi is obviously kind of getting it in a way, but the Pocophone, the problem again is Chinese phone. It's very baroque, it's all skin all the time. And I like the word baroque for this, because it really feels, these phones really feel ornamental for the sake of being ornamental. It's like, use a Vivo or Oppo phone, and it's just like, it's kind of this weird twilight zone of uncanny valley between an iPhone and a highly skinned Samsung or HTC phone from 5 years ago, and it's kind of horrible because of it. And you just want to put Nova Launcher on it and call it a day. But the phones themselves, technically speaking, are really great. And so it's like, if only these Chinese companies would stop with the Baroque stuff and get down to business like OnePlus did, and consider the Western, US, and even Indian market, where I think in India, I would argue that pure Android is actually quite popular.
Yeah, it is. But how long it took, just look back and see how long it took Samsung to understand that. I remember, the very beginning in Europe, Italy was one of the first market where Samsung was successful, because back then it was an open market. There was no subsidies, and Italy's always been quite open to new vendors, and they were coming not just with their weird ringtones, but the games, everything was very, very Korean, and it took them a while to move away from there.
Oh yeah, I remember that Korean vibe that LG and Samsung had 5 years ago, even before that. It was so interesting and weird. It was kind of like Chinese phone feel today, but different. It's hard to explain.
Yes.
So speaking of, 6T phone of the year, OnePlus 6T, at least nominated by Android Police. I'm sure we're going to see more phone of the year for the 6T. But the Engadget wrote a story, our good friend Sherilyn, about the Pixel 3 XL being their best pick for phone camera of the year. And I would absolutely agree with that. I would say it's a toss between that and a Mate 20 Pro for camera. But what's your take? I mean, have you used all of these devices? Do you feel there's a trend here?
Most of them. I need to be very careful about what I say, because I don't want to give away I'm one of the GSMA judges for Mobile World Congress device of the year, so I don't want to give all my cards away.
Of course. Well, do what you think is right, and we can skip forward too if you want.
No, that's fine. I do think that there's a trend, and for sure, because of all the reasons that we just discussed, I think OnePlus definitely deserves a place in the shortlist. So I'm going to talk about my shortlist. I do think that the Mate 20 Pro is a great device. If they pull back a little bit around their own UI, it would be even a better device. But there's no question that the camera is great. I did like the Note 9, not as revolutionary from a phone perspective. Samsung is more on a path.
It's foundational, right? It's
correct.
Like a solid foundation. Like you can buy that phone and be future-proof for 2 years and not even have to blink an eye, right?
Yeah, and then I do think that the Pixel is interesting when it comes to the camera, just because a lot of what they do is software based, and I think
there's
correct, and I think there's a little bit of silliness to how many freaking lenses you can have on the back of your phone versus how smart can your software be to get you the shot that you want. And then you get into the whole debate. I talk often about how nobody cares about being a good photographer. Everybody cares about having a great shot, when you're talking about mass market photography. And I think that's where we're getting. And that, having a Google that actually kind of mocks the industry by saying, we only need one lens. It's kind of refreshing.
They kind of contradict themselves though, because the front camera has 2 lenses. Correct. Right, this year.
But that's look, AR, right?
Google is such a company of paradoxes. I think they own the AI and computational photography space by a long shot. I don't think even Huawei comes close.
Yeah, I agree.
Huawei's doing it by a combination of the best hardware they can do and the best software they can do. And together they're doing really good stuff. But, I want to also say that, I agree with you that, you can do great with one lens, but I think that's going to change soon. I think what we're going to see is you probably saw that LG patent a little while ago.
Yes.
That I covered on the podcast 2 or 3 episodes ago over the 16 lens phone. And it's not the first time we've seen that. We've seen arrays of 9 lenses on the back, and they're very simple camera modules. So they have, relatively affordable sensors with affordable lenses, no autofocus, no OIS, and you throw enough compute power behind capturing 16 images or 9 images, and you mix it all up into the great computational photography soup, and you get incredible results. You get the results that are even better than Pixel 3 XL potentially, that let you refocus after the fact, change the angle after the fact, zoom after the fact. Without loss. And I think that's actually really the future, because I think the proliferation of lenses is going to happen. I think the ultimate camera system will have basically the entire back of the phone covered in pixels that are lenses, that are each of them a sensor, and you reconstruct in software from there. And the same pixels I used as display and I used as vibrational, piezo things for sound and for haptic feedback, and I also used as antennas, you know what I'm saying? For the 5G array. That's the future. That's where we're going.
I just want to get there in a sensible way.
Correct.
And what I mean by that is I'm tired of seeing, added features for the sake of saying that, mine is bigger than yours. That's not going to get us anywhere, right?
That's so true.
And I think that when you're starting to see, even just with the 3 lenses, the vendors that think about it and think about, what happens to your picture, how the pictures that you're taking is stored, what does it, there's a lot there. And at the same time, I think, as we saw last week, there's a lot that is now enabled by the chips, right? And so it'd be interesting to see when some of the capabilities are in the core chipset that you're using when it comes to Qualcomm. How do you differentiate on top of that? Where are you going to go? And are just the companies that know how to do software that well that are going to be able to, set themselves apart from everybody else that is enabled from that core chipset architecture? So I think that is going to be fascinating to watch.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. So yeah, I would say for me, going back to, circling back, I think the Pixel 3, Pixel 3 XL would definitely be one of my choices. I'm gonna have to make a tough decision here, and because of for me the Mate 20 Pro, I would say I would give them I would let them share the number 1 spot. The Pixel 3, Pixel 3 XL makes the best portraits, has the best mash the button camera of any camera I've ever used by far. It's a small improvement over the 2 XL, but it's significant enough to keep it in the lead. The Mate 20 Pro is, to me, the best camera as well, because it is the camera I can be the most creative with. And
interesting.
The portraits aren't quite as good, for example, but it's so flexible with these 3 lenses. The fact that it has wide, tele, and normal. The V40 has that as well from LG, but the V40 doesn't quite perform in terms of software and AI as much in the back end. And so I feel like those 2 are my top kind of 1 combined, and they're shared for a different reason. I think that, and it goes from there. I mean, the Galaxies are still really high up there. The OnePlus 6 is not. The 6T is not. It's good. It's a decent. It's a perfectly fine camera, but it's still not quite at the level of these others.
Yeah.
But it's still it's fine. It's
I'm
not.
Curious
it doesn't handicap it too much, I think.
What kind of person are you in terms of, do you enjoy a picture like this night picture debate that is going on, right? Everybody's posting things and it's like, oh, look, this is the iPhone that shows, and this is, and because one thing that I noticed when I was going around London taking pictures at nighttime with the Mate Pro was that it was a great picture, but it wasn't what I was seeing in real life.
Right.
So what kind of person are you? Do you want a great picture or do you want a realistic picture?
Yeah, I think that's I want both. Like it's hard to explain, but I feel like sometimes you're right that the night mode on the Pixel is more realistic.
Yeah.
But on the the Mate 20 Pro, it might be able to capture more light. In some ways, it depends.
It's beautiful, and there are some effects that are amazing. But
both cameras night mode on. I think even the OnePlus 6T, what really helps it is that it has a night mode, and in that night mode, it matches the regular mode on most other phones, which is great. So at least that saves it. But what I'm saying is these night modes, at least on those two phones, the Pixel 3 and the Mate 20 series, the Mate 20 Pro at least, is that they feel. Like sometimes I prefer one and sometimes I prefer the other.
Yeah, it's not always consistent. It's true.
No.
Yeah.
Sometimes I feel the Pixel 3 is overprocessed and I'm like, oh my God. And sometimes I feel the Pixel 3 is gathering more light than the Mate 20 Pro. Sometimes it's the other way around. And so I can't make up my mind. I think overall you're going to be well served by both. I feel like these are still kind of works in progress. But here's the beautiful thing about it. If you're going to have that phone for a year or two, that software is going to keep improving.
That's right.
And you're going to get updates. And I'm really surprised how many updates my Mate 20 Pro has received. So I feel like Huawei is actually on board with updates now. And of course, Google, of course, we know is on board with updates. So
yeah.
I think that gets me very excited no matter what. I feel that, the Pixel 3, Pixel 3 XL, the only reason I use that phone is like I've been a Nexus and Pixel user as my primary device since day one, since the HTC G1.
Oh wow!
Right, T-Mobile G1. So and then that's essentially the proto Nexus, right?
Yeah.
And so ever since then, I've been Pixel or Nexus, and I feel that the 3 XL is the first time where I feel like I'm not sure if I want to keep that as my main daily driver, and it's. Only reason I'm still keeping it is because photography is such a big part of my mobile experience, and it nails that. But I feel like there's so many things I don't like about it. I feel that the skin actually of the Pixel has deviated too far from Android One. I feel that it's too customized. I don't like that they imposed the gesture pill on us this year. I don't like it at all. I like the regular Android buttons, or at least I like gestures when they're done right, like OnePlus is done. And so I also feel 4 gigs of RAM is not enough for the kind of money. I mean, I didn't spend money on it, but for the kind of money people spend on that phone. And I feel that, the build quality is not special enough. And I think that Google's kind of in missing the point that, Apple always said that the iPhone is a vehicle, into the app ecosystem and the window into it, right? That's the display is what really is the soul of the phone,
right? And
the hardware should just be behind it and do its thing. But they still make gorgeous hardware. They still make super pristine high-end hardware, and the Pixel 3 XL doesn't feel like that for almost the same money, and it vexes me that Google is kind of like very complacent here. And that notch on the Pixel 3 XL is ridiculous. How did that pass any kind of product testing? I cannot understand. And so to me, that's where I'm struggling now. I feel like maybe next year I'll switch to OnePlus as a main device. Maybe it'll be the Mate 20 Pro. I think the only thing holding me back from the Mate 20 Pro is the software, honestly, because I think from a point of view of the hardware spec sheet, that phone is a beast. I mean, it's insane what that phone can do. And so I'm just I'm very conflicted right now about what Google is doing, frankly. I feel like I'd be better served with an Android One device like a Nokia, or, you know what I'm saying?
Oh, that's another company that, we're not going to see here, and that is doing great stuff
Phenomenal stuff.
Really good price point. But, to your point about Google, is interesting that the made by Google devices, even the Pixel Book, have, I think the best way I came to describe it is like an IKEA feeling to it. So, they're minimalistic. They're good, but a little bit austere. I don't know even if that's the word. They seem like they don't want to splurge. They don't want to make it too.
And that's fine when they were making Nexuses at $300-400. But now it's a different world out there.
Right.
And if you're going to sell your phones at $900, $800, $700, even OnePlus, I think, is a perfect example. They're not flashy by any means. They're very, I think, I wouldn't say they're austere, but they're more interesting than a Pixel 3.
Yeah.
Yet at the same time, they don't feel held back.
Yeah.
And of course, the specs are on top, right? Like, you don't get 4 gigs of RAM on a OnePlus 6T. I mean, So I think that's kind of where I'm at with it. I'm definitely conflicted, but I would say my top phones for this year, and preliminary, because I'm going to have probably an episode about that, is I would say that the Mate 20 Pro is top phone, and then close behind is OnePlus 6T, and probably the Pixel 3, 3 XL, and then the Note 9, and I can't think of more after that. I do like the LG V40 for some things. The P20 Pro was great this year, but the Mate 20 Pro has basically replaced it in my universe. And then the OnePlus 6T, the OnePlus 6, I think, is still a really solid phone, because you're getting pretty much all of 6T features, minor the fingerprint reader, and you get the headphone jack and the notification light that is gone now from the 6T for $100 less. If you like right now, they're still selling it, and you get a really great discount. But if you look on paper, they're the same, right? Almost. Right. So that's a really good option if you're not on Verizon and you want a OnePlus that's a little cheaper, and you really value the headphone jack and the notification light above the in-display fingerprint reader and the larger battery. So, I don't know. These are, I would say, I can't throw an iPhone in there this year, because I have an iPhone 10, but I don't have a 10S or 10S Max or 10R, and I haven't really had a chance to try them. And the feeling I get from everyone is that, they're great phones, but that's it, right? There's no excitement around them.
Well, the Max is my main device, and that's more out of, it's hard as an analyst, right? Because I try everything, but then there's the human side of me that gravitates one way or another. And I'm always been more iOS, and God forbid I'm going to say this, Windows phone than Android.
I think Windows Phone was really great in its day.
I'm more of the organized chaos when it comes to my life and my phone than not total chaos. And I think sometimes, especially because of the skin that different vendors put on Android, I don't know, I just don't enjoy the actual OS as much. I enjoy some of the services, and obviously, a lot of the stuff that Google is doing, from Maps to, G Suite and music and everything else on top of it. But from a UI perspective, iOS and Windows Phone were more natural to me. And so that's what it is.
And you're not the only one. I think there's a lot of people in that boat. I highly recommend iPhones to most of the people I know that are not tech-savvy early adopters and are potentially already coming from a lot of Apple products, because they're going to be happier.
And I think that's the other part, is what else, in the ecosystem of your devices you're using. And I'm not, although I do tech, I don't mess around with my phones a lot. I don't take pleasure, as some people do, in spending a lot of time setting up their phones and tinkering and all of that, which is what Android lets you do best. And, the first thing that when I moved from a PC to a Mac, I was like, hold on, why everything has to be great? Why can I not change the way my Mac looks, right? And you get used to it. You get used to, kind of Apple making decisions for you, and you either like it or you hate it. And that's how it is. So it really becomes more kind of an ecosystem question. But what I think is really exciting that you're pointing at is that the Android ecosystem has never been this strong. We've had quite a few years where it was either Samsung or Samsung.
Yeah.
And
no, so there's tons of innovation happening, and it's all coming from China.
Right. Exactly.
That's a great segue, actually. Let's talk about those displays and form factors. So we all know that the holy grail is you pick up a phone that's relatively decent, like small size-ish in your hand, but has all display in the front, so you get the maximum real estate for the size of the phone. That's where we're going, right? 99% screen to body ratio, no bezels, no cameras, no sensors, no notches, no speakers, nothing. And we're getting there very rapidly, and everybody's doing really weird stuff to get there, which I think is making me super excited because I'm a nerd and I like seeing weird stuff, even though it might not be super practical, What's your take on that? Like we've seen, like a quick history. Essential was the first with a notch, and the iPhone really popularized the notch. Everybody copied the iPhone notch. Then they came in different sizes and thicknesses, and the worst being the Pixel 3, and then the best being these teardrop notches we're seeing, like the OnePlus 6T.
Right.
And now we're hearing about. I mean, it's not just a rumor anymore. We have two phones that were announced this week that have a punch hole, like a cut in the middle. Well, not middle, but in a corner of the screen that's surrounded by screen where the front-facing camera sits. There's the Honor View 20, which was announced this week, which replaces last year's View 10. It's a pretty high-end Honor phone, not quite as high-end as the Magic 2 that they recently announced, but very high-end. It has a 48-megapixel rear camera, which is another thing we're starting to see happening, where they're combining the dual-camera ISP for a single camera, and doing some hopefully crazy stuff with that. But the Galaxy A8s from Samsung has also got a punch hole display. So,
Infinity O
weird,
display.
Right? Yeah, Infinity O, as they call it. So what's your take? I think you think this is just a logical progression of this trend?
I do. I think that, like we were saying earlier, there's never enough screen, and the way that you can deliver that. That is not, it doesn't impair how much you can enjoy this screen, which is sometimes what happens with a notch, that you're better off actually ending up with a forehead instead of just the notch, because you might as well just ignore the upper part of your screen, wasn't ideal. And so trying to figure out how you're going to do that. Now, I think some are getting a little bit too inventive, but like you said before, is a path, right? So you try different things and see what happens. Because the Oppo that had, I think it was Oppo, the one that had the pop-up camera.
Yeah, the Find X.
Great idea, but the casualty on that device is going to be huge, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be, you have to worry about reliability, moving parts, and no waterproofing, right?
Correct.
The Vivo Nex was the other one, the Nex S. Had the tiny little pop-up camera, not the whole back popping up like the Oppo Find X. And then the Magic 2 from Honor I just mentioned is kind of like the Find X has it's a slider in the back, but instead of being electric, it's manually activated. It's kind of like you slide it back like the old days, like those Samsung phones with the keypad that slid out underneath. The same thing. So we're seeing all this interesting stuff. We're seeing phones like the Nubia X from ZTE that as dual screen. And in fact, yesterday, just as I had already sent you the show notes with the different links, Engadget posted a story of a new phone from Vivo called the Nex Dual Screen, which is basically the same idea. There's no front-facing camera. There's only a rear one, but they put a screen in the back that covers almost the entire back of the phone. So you have two screens to choose from. It's very odd and very interesting, and I love that about Android.
I was scratching my head, to be honest with you, with that one.
But I love it because that's what Android does. It's like, let's go do something weird and see if it sticks. Like, you remember the Note? Let's do something weird and see if it sticks. It really did stick, because everybody has a Note in their pocket now, pretty much, right? In the sense of the form factor.
Yeah, the form factor, yeah.
So I think it's great. I think I'm looking forward to seeing how this develops.
What I find interesting is that some of this innovation is coming in the mid-tier, not the high end.
And that's exactly right. I know. And I think the next thing we're going to see I'm calling it now. We're going to see the punch hole thing, but we're going to see that punch hole is going to be actually covered by display, like actual pixels. And it's going to be OLED, and there's going to be a higher sensitivity sensor with a faster lens behind a part of the display. And that part of the display is going to go black. The pixels are going to turn off when you take a photo in the front camera. And the camera will shoot right through the OLED display.
Wow.
That's the next thing we're going to see. So basically, it's a punch hole that the hole closes when the camera is not there.
Right.
You know? And that's the next logical thing. And then, you know, who knows where we go from there? I mean, I don't know. That's what I love about this right now. It's like this.
Isn't it funny that we are talking about all this innovation, which is amazing, and we're still bitching about not having an audio jack in our phones?
Yeah, well, that's the thing. They removed it. Like, I mean, they had it, then they decided that's the most boneheaded thing in the entire phone industry we've had to deal with since the iPhone was announced, in my opinion. You know, think about this. The G1 T-Mobile, the first HTC Android phone, did not have a headphone jack.
Yeah, they were the first ones.
It was using the USB-X, mini USB-X connector, which was a custom connector to HTC that was compatible with mini USB. So you could use a regular cable to charge it, but it had extra pins for audio, and you had to get an adapter. I mean, we're back to that. It's ridiculous. I just don't get it. It's like, don't even get me started.
Sorry. Didn't mean to bring up something painful.
Yeah. I mean, let's switch gears. There's a few more things I want to talk about. We've talked about the Pocophone. You know, watch my unboxing video. I'll put a link in the show notes. I'll put also a link to the show notes to my McLaren OnePlus 6 unboxing. I got a chance to play with, to finally use and test drive the Huawei Watch GT, which is really a weird little interesting product, because it's basically, if you take a Huawei Band 3 Pro, which is basically like a $69 fitness band, and you turn it into a smartwatch looking thing that's relatively high end, you get the Huawei Watch GT. In terms of software and functionality, it is a dumb watch, or a dumb smartwatch, if you want to call it that, a fitness band kind of device. So it's got great battery life, up to 2 weeks, because it's got a big battery, because it's got a big body. It looks a lot like a hybrid between the Huawei Watch 2 and the original Huawei Watch. But again, it's not Android Wear or whatever it's called now, Wear OS.
Yeah.
It's their own custom OS. It's got notifications, and that's the weak spot. The notifications are not the best implementation. It's just very basic. But on the plus side, great battery life, 2 weeks. It has sleep tracking and continuous heart rate monitoring which is really, I think, really the killer app for this thing. Because for me, I find that I want notifications, and that's maybe the weak spot of that watch. But I think that what I really want is sleep tracking and continuous heart rate monitoring, because I find that really helpful in my old age, Carolina.
Don't say that.
Nah, I'm just kidding. How do you feel? I mean, have you played with it? Are you a watch / fitness band person?
I am. Before all of this, got to be a talking point, I was a Pebble user, and I used one since the very beginning. Loved it. It did what they said on the box.
On the box, which was unlike all the other smartwatches at the time.
Correct. And then I went to an Apple Watch, which
makes sense if you're an iPhone user, yeah.
And I went through all the different. I do use the Galaxy Gear Fit for a while. I like the design. I think the latest generation is a little bit too wide for me, and so it was not as comfortable. I really wanted to love their watch, but it's heavy. After wearing it for a while. And it's the same with Huawei. It was interesting. Do you remember the first band that they did that doubled into a headset? A Bluetooth headset?
Yes, absolutely.
I thought that was genius, because it was it was at the very beginning of the market, where at that price point, trying to convince consumers that they needed a band was still hard. And what they did was, well, you're going to use a headset, so you might as well have a headset that doubles into a fitness band. And I thought that was genius.
What
it was a
strange
different
combo.
right? But that's the point, right? It's trying to understand where consumers see a return, right, in the money that they're spending. At that point in time, fitness wasn't a thing for the mass market. It was before Fitbit, became the leader in that price point. So yeah, it's quite interesting also to see how, we were talking just now about the innovation on the phone side, and I just don't understand why the wearable has not made it on the Android side, right? That is just what you see out there is basically Apple Watch and Fitbit, and that's that.
Yeah, I think, look, a lot of it has to do with Apple coming into the fray. I think if Pebble had been run differently, and I could write a book about this since I was there.
Right.
We tried really hard on the exec team to convince the founder, but I think it had a chance to own the mid range of the market, like not the fitness band, which I think Xiaomi has shown that you can make a really great $20 fitness band. And nobody can beat that, right? $20. You could throw them away every week, buy a new one. It'd be like the price of 2 lattes in San Francisco.
Boxes. Yeah,
it's insane. And then I think we could have owned the $100 to $200 price range, maybe up to $250, because the Apple Watch is still very expensive, even though it's phenomenal.
Yeah.
And I think when I look at how far we were behind in terms of product, because we didn't have the numbers that allowed us to manufacture our own displays, right? You have to have a certain initial cash investment, and the minimum you're going to get in display manufacturing is 100,000 displays, right? They're not going to make a custom display for you unless you order less than 100, more than 100,000. So we never really had that kind of throughput in terms of sales to really be able to justify having a custom display. And I thought it was really holding us back in terms of design and in terms of thinness and quality of display, et cetera, et cetera. And, I think there were plans to change that, but it just never happened. It didn't look like it was going to happen, which is part of the reason I left. But I feel like we had an opportunity there. And but because Pebble disappeared, Fitbit tried to take it on, but they're ultimately a fitness band company. They don't understand smartwatches. I still don't think they do. I think they're getting there a little bit because they acquired some of the Pebble software people, but I just think they're misguided. I don't think they're doing it right. And I think, to me, that's what this why Watch GT is so interesting, because it feels to me like it's in many ways what the Pebble could have become. Right? Except it doesn't have apps, which Pebble had was a huge part of Pebble. But I honestly always felt that apps at Pebble was kind of like the initial flash in the pan that got the early adopters interested, but nobody really cared and used apps on a watch. So that was going to go away eventually. And I think that what we look at the Watch GT today, 2-week battery life, beautiful OLED display, great continuous heart rate monitoring and sleep tracking, and decent notifications, which could easily be made even much, much better in software, is really all you need in a watch. And I don't know exactly what the price point is on that watch anymore. I have to look it up, but it's reasonably priced. It's not more expensive it's definitely less expensive than an Apple Watch.
Yeah.
So I think this is kind of what the Pebble, it kind of is kind of like, reminds me of Pebble a lot. But yeah, I don't think there is. I think that's losing Pebble was a big part of that, and I think the fact that Google had no direction with Android Wear,
correct,
and they really treated it like a some sort of side project, like many things they've done. Android TV, anyone? Android Auto, anyone?
I also think that it took longer than they thought it would take to get volume and sort in their head where the place, for wearables was going to be. And then the home took off. And so I think that, wearables dropped in importance and the home came up. And so looking at Google Home speakers, and correct. Exactly. And so I think that's, from a priority perspective, what happened as well.
And they nailed home.
Oh, yeah.
They nailed it so hard. I mean, honestly, Echo makes me laugh. I mean, Google Home is such a better system in every way for me. The only thing is it lacks a lot of integration still, and I think they're working on that. But yeah. One last thing I want to bring up before we wrap up is MediaTek launched a new chip called the P90. I know you saw a little bit of that, and I got briefed in Taiwan when I was there in early November. And it's really interesting because they're pushing hard on imaging and AI, and still keeping it in the mid-range price tier, and performance-wise, it's a really interesting chip. So what's your take on what you've seen so far on that?
Well, I'm not, semiconductor is something that I try and know enough to get by.
Yeah,
but
I'm the same way. Yeah.
But I let Ben just geek out on it because he loves it. So,
of course.
But for me, what is interesting is that, MediaTek came out many years ago, and people are like, media who? And then,
Right.
And here they are still in a world where if you look at everything else, right, it's very hard to come out as it's kind of a new kid on the block and cut out a market for you and enable an ecosystem that wouldn't exist without you, right? Because Qualcomm responded to them but didn't get there first. So
Right.
I mean, for me, MediaTek is, you need to give it credit for enabling a lot of the innovation that we're talking about now, because that got Qualcomm to pay more attention to what was happening. And, in a bit like the iPhone created Android to some extent, right? And the ecosystem and all of that is like, okay, Google obviously it was a project that was already there, but that's what is, in my opinion, beautiful about MediaTek, and the fact that they are able now to deliver that imaging and AI focus at a mid-tier price point will mean that innovation will continue to foster, which is great for the industry and ultimately for consumers.
Yes, and they announced while I was in Taiwan, they announced their 5G modem, which is compatible, the P90 is compatible with. So it's not millimeter wave, they only support sub-6. But look, it's interesting. It's a start. And I think there are a lot of phones that could benefit from the MediaTek that are currently on Qualcomm chips because of price. The Palm is a good example. I think that tiny little phone with a few changes could become a really cool phone for some people as a main phone if it had better battery life. And a lot of that right now has to do with, actually the battery life is really an issue because it's designed to be a secondary device. But if they made the battery slightly bigger, they would be able to make it work as a single phone for some people. What I think the MediaTek would allow is the price point to drop, because 350 is too high.
It's too high.
And
I agree.
200 for that phone with a MediaTek chip and a slightly bigger battery, and that phone would actually be an interesting phone for some people. And I think, so I think Qualcomm makes great chips, the 200 and 400, the 200, and 400 series. But I still always feel like MediaTek manages to undercut them. And maybe Qualcomm could completely quell that in some way. But we're certainly, I haven't really seen it yet. And speaking of Qualcomm, what were your thoughts on last week's announcements?
I thought it was interesting to see finally, after we spoke about 5G coming last year, to actually see that it's real and it is not just a story for the future. It's here. We saw the network working. We did a video call over it. But I also, for me, it was interesting to still see when the carriers were talking at the event, how much work the actual ecosystem has to still do to not just understand that looking at the past is not going to help you here very much, because this is a totally different battle.
Absolutely.
But how you need to think about the especially the data plan and the cost, right? How you need to think about this differently. It's not just about, it's going to be more expensive. Sure, we know that, even if they don't tell us, right? But
of course they will.
How am I going to pay? Make it that in a way that I see the value and I'll be happy, or at least not sad, to pay for more because I see the value. And I have little confidence that we're nowhere near carriers really thinking out of the box and tackling this in a different way. And then
You're right.
that
The
was
value
on the
proposition
5G.
is tough right
yes,
now, right?
very much
Yeah.
so. On the connected PC, I'm excited about the fact that I think Qualcomm's showing that they're ready to take more of a role in guiding, again, the carriers, the retail, so that what I think is the next generation of computing, there's no, we're not going to escape this. Our computers will be connected. That's what, where we're going to get to.
Oh yeah, this is inevitable. And ARM will run most laptops. That's also inevitable.
Correct.
I'm honestly waiting really with as much as I'm not a big fan of iOS because I like Android better for my workflow, and mostly pure Android. I'm a huge Mac fan, and I've used the Macs for a really long time because it's Unix based. It's a big part of it. I do feel that, yes, I wish I could customize it more, but I'm kind of done customizing computers. I've spent 30, 40 years of my life playing with desktop and laptop computers, and I've had my chance to you do neon green fans and customize the skin and fonts on my phone, on my computer. So I'm really happy to see. I want to see what Apple does with an ARM-based Mac OS device.
Yeah, and I think we're getting closer.
We're very,
it, right?
very close.
Yeah,
and I'm happy to see that Qualcomm is kind of leading the way right now because Windows 10 on ARM is only going to get better. It's going to get. I think Intel is in a world of pain right now.
Well, I feel a little bit better this week about Intel than I did last week.
Okay.
Just because it seems that they finally understand that, a fully Intel architecture is not the only way. And so they need to be more accommodating. And so this idea that now you could have an Intel chip running on an ARM architecture, it's quite fascinating. And, they obviously did not position it this way, but they did say that, there's more flexibility in what architecture they're going to build on. And so, I think that the pain they've been through, which was a lot, I think got them to think differently about the market. And that's not a bad thing. Sometime out of a painful experiment or period in time in your life of the company, you get to discover something that would never have happened if your success continued or if you were not challenged in the same way, right? So I'm excited about that. Obviously, the proof is in the pudding, but...
Yeah, I'm glad they're reacting, but I mean, here's the thing that I never understood, and Intel could have licensed ARM a long time ago. In fact, they had ARM, they owned an ARM processor brand and got rid of it.
Yeah.
Which at the time I was completely stunned. I was like, "Are you serious? This is the future. What are you doing, Intel?" And then betting everything on x86 is so silly to me. It's almost political at this point. It's almost like institutional for them. And ARM, they make ARM chips, Intel. You're one of the best fabs in the world, and it doesn't stop you from making x86. I think the high end is going to be served by x86 in the laptop world for a long time to come. I think that ARM's going to own the low end, the portable, the always connected PC for sure. Whether it's Apple make their own chips or Qualcomm or even others, I wouldn't be surprised. MediaTek's made tablet chips for a long time now, so they could do the same. So I think that's kind of where I'm at for it. I want to see them just break away from this weird stubbornness they have. And
I think we get in there. I'm encouraged, as I said.
It's just it's like Nokia and BlackBerry. Their stubbornness cost them their lives.
Absolutely.
They eventually saw it, but it was too late. So I don't want that to happen because Intel is one of the foundational companies of our computing world.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So quick thing before we wrap up. I have a Snapdragon 855 reference device, hands-on, on my YouTube channel. So I'll put the link to that. It's their kind of device that people can use to test the chip. And it looks like it's so refined. They used to be bulky and ugly.
Yeah, it was quite impressive, wasn't it?
And, not very representative of a phone. Yeah. Now they look like they could just be something you could buy, at your local Best Buy. It's amazing. Carolina, thanks for being on the show. Do you want to tell the audience where they can find you on the internet?
Absolutely.
If you publish anywhere, what podcasts you do, what your handles are on social, all that?
Yes. So I'm on Twitter under Caro, CARO _Milanesi, MILANESI. Somebody says Milan easy. Kind of, where? I'm also on techpinions.com. I have a column every Wednesday, and I'm guest on several different podcasts, including the TechPinion podcast on Instagram, the same handle as Twitter. And if you want to know all about my dogs and my daughter, then you can friend me on Facebook.
There you go. Yeah, you've heard it here first. So you know where to find me, folks. I'm at Tankgirl, TNKGRL, both on Twitter and Instagram. That's like Tankgirl the comic book. Drop the vowels, and you got my handle. You know where to find me on YouTube. YouTube is a complement to the podcast. It's where I put unboxings, hands-ons, this kind of stuff. YouTube.com/Miriam Jouar. Just spell out my full name, Miriam with a Y. And of course, the podcast lives at mobiletechpodcast.com. If it's your first time listening, please subscribe. I'm on every podcast platform you can imagine: Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Pocket Casts, Overcast, Stitcher, Slacker, TuneIn Radio. Not on SoundCloud yet, working on that. Not on YouTube. I'm looking at putting my podcast on YouTube. I said I was going to do it, but the logistics of it are a little bit too much right now. So it's going to come. Stay tuned for that. And then, remember, you can just type Mobile Tech Podcast and maybe add Tankgirl, TNKGRL to that to find me anywhere on the web. And then I want to thank our sponsor, Audible. Audible is really the place to be for audiobooks. If you like listening to books instead of reading them, this is really the service to use, audible.com. So go check it out. There's a link in the show notes that will give you an ability to subscribe and support the podcast at the same time. It's audibletrial.com/mobiletech. That's audibletrial.com/mobiletech. If you go there and you subscribe to Audible, which you can do and try it for free for 30 days, you will support the podcast. So hopefully you can do that. And if you like books, this is definitely a great thing to do, because sometimes you can't read books. You're maybe driving or whatever. And Audible has got you. Thanks, Carolina, for being on the show again. I really appreciate you coming.
It was a pleasure.
Absolutely. We'll have you on again. This was a lot of fun.
Same here.
So stay tuned for another show next week, and cheers.
This has been the Mobile Tech Podcast with Tank Girl, proudly presented by worldpodcasts.com. You can visit us online at mobiletechpodcast.com.